$1 for a jailhouse. That is what it came to. A girl of 19, turned out of the only roof she had with a bindle and a stocking of coin, walked into a county office in the Arizona high desert and laid down a single silver dollar for a stone jail that had stood empty for 24 years. The strap iron cells inside had rusted solid. The lock on the great door hadn't turned since the last prisoner walked free. The men in the town told her flat that she'd bought herself a tomb with bars on it, and they weren't unkind when they said it, only sure. None of them knew. Nobody in that town had known in 24 years what had been sealed up inside one of those cells, behind the iron, waiting on the one person who would think to look there. If a story like this finds a place in you, do us the kindness of subscribing and drop a comment telling us where you're listening from. It lifts us more than you'd guess, seeing how far these carry. Cordelia Vane. That was her name, though her father had always shortened it to Cord, which suited her better than the long, soft name her dead mother had chosen. She came up in Benson, a rail and freight town on the San Pedro, where the trains took on water, and the smell of coal smoke and creosote hung over everything. Her father was the town blacksmith. His shop stood by the depot, and Cord grew up inside the ring of his hammer, in the red glow and the hiss of quenched iron and the smell of scorched hoof and hot coal that never quite washed out of her clothes. Her mother had died bearing a second child that did not live either when Cord was 4, so it was the two of them, the smith and his girl and the forge. And that was world enough. Here is the thing about Cord that the rest turns on. Where other children were handed dolls, she was handed, at 6, a broken padlock her father meant to throw in the scrap barrel. She took it apart, not roughly, carefully laying each ward and spring and the little curved bolt out on the anvil's face in the order they came, studying how the key's cuts lifted the wards to let the shackle spring. Then she put it back together, filed a new key from a blank, and opened it, 6 years old. Her father found the mended lock hanging on his shop nail with a fresh-cut key in it, and did not laugh. He turned it over a long while and said the child had a feel for locks, for how a thing is shut and how it is opened, which he allowed were the same knowledge seen from 2 sides, and that the good Lord did not hand a girl that particular feel for nothing. Cord did not know what he meant. She would come to. Her father's lungs went bad the way a smith's lungs go, thick with a lifetime of coal smoke and forge scale, and he failed slowly over 2 years, and then quicker, and he died the autumn Cord turned 16, with his hammer still hanging where he'd left it. There is a grief that arrives like a struck spark, sudden and bright and gone, and there is the kind that comes on like a fire banked down for the night, glowing low and long and refusing to go out. Cord's was the banked kind. She kept his lightest hammer and a set of his files, and she went on because a girl of 16 in that country is given no other road to walk, and a girl that age with no people is soon taken up by those who feel the weight of the duty. The family that ran the Benson livery and freight took her on as help, which everyone in town understood to mean charity dressed in work clothes. She mucked stalls and greased axles and shod the freight teams when their own man was drunk, which was often, and she kept her head down and her mouth shut, having learned young that a girl who complains under a grudging roof only teaches that roof to want her gone, but she found the one who set her on her road. There was an old man at the edge of Benson, an iron worker named Ignac Weber, a Hungarian who had made locks and hinges and jail grates for half the territory in his day, and still kept a small forge and a bench of fine files. Cord went to him on her Sundays, and he gave her the hours no one at the livery ever would. He taught her past what her father had lived to teach, the fine end of the iron trade. How to cut a key to a lock you cannot open by reading the words through the keyhole with a smoked blank and letting the marks show you where they bind. how to forge a spring that keeps its temper, how to case-harden a bolt so it wears a lifetime, how to pick a warded lock and a lever lock and know from the feel of it which you faced. And he taught her the thing she always carried. Every lock, he said, turning a finished key in the lamplight, is only a question with one right answer. There is no lock. A patient hand can't ask right. The trick is remembering the door swings both ways. What shuts a thing in, shuts the world out. She did not grasp the whole of that then. She would, and it would cost her to learn it. Her coins went into a Bull Durham tobacco tin, the flat pocket kind, with the drawstring pouch's tin cousin, kept in the toe of her father's spare work boot under her cot. $40 by 18, near 50 by 19. And in the week, she turned 19. The livery keeper's wife turned out the lean-to for a clear out, and heard the boot rattle, and the fight that came was never truly about the coins. It was 3 years of a charity girl the house had endured without wanting, boiling over at last across a tobacco tin of silver. By dark Cord stood in the road with her bindle, and her Bull Durham tin, and her father's lightest hammer, and the door of her last shelter latched behind her and stayed shut, kicked out. 19, and not one place under the wide sky that was hers. It was old Weber who pointed to her. He knew of a town 2 days north and east, up in the higher desert where the grama grass came in, a played-out silver camp called Redemption Gap that had emptied when the vein pinched out, and standing at the end of that town street was the old county jail, shut since the county seat moved away, that the board would sign over for the back taxes to anyone fool enough or hard enough to want it. If she wanted iron to work and a forge to light and no man's leave to answer to, that was as good a place as any to start. Cord had not planned to go anywhere, but a girl whose whole estate fits in one bindle has little to keep her rooted. And so at first light, she took the northbound. The road climbed slowly out of the river valley and into the high desert, and the country got harder and cleaner and wider the whole way. The mesquite bottoms fell behind, and the land opened into long tan reaches of grama and yucca, the mountains standing blue and jagged on every side, the sky so deep and so empty it seemed to pull the breath up out of you. Antelope watched the coach from a rise and then were gone. The wind carried the dry resin smell of the desert, and, near a windmill turning slow over a stock tank, the sudden green wet breath of the one water for miles. A red-tailed hawk screamed once, high and far. Cord took it all in with the still. Close attention she gave a lock she meant to open, and though she had never been up into that country, its hard, bright emptiness sat oddly right in her, like the clean feel of a well-cut key sliding home. Redemption Gap, at the top of the grade, was a town the silver had raised and the pinch-out had killed. One short street, half its adobe and false fronts, caving quietly back to dirt, the head frame of the dead mine standing skeletal on the hill above. A store, a church, a shut assay shed. The man who met her where the road ran out was old Weber's nephew, a broad, slow, easy fellow named Cassius, who kept the town's little store and carried every stone and lintel of that country in his head, and who spoke barely at all on the walk up the street and let the huge dry dusk carry the quiet. At the head of the street, where the town gave out to open grass, he stopped before a low, grim, flat-roofed building of dressed stone and lifted his chin at it. That one. That's what my uncle wrote me you'd come to see. The jail was a squat, thick-walled building of dressed native stone, built the way a jail is always built. Heavy, fireproof, made to hold, with a single barred window high in each wall and a great iron strap door in front. Inside, Cassius said, ran a short corridor and 2 cells, their fronts and their bunks and their bars all forged of strap iron by some smith, long dead. The flat roof had cracked and let the rainwork in over the years, and rust bloomed orange down the cell fronts, and pack rats had built in the corners. But the stone walls stood plumb and true, 2 feet through laid by a mason who built to outlast the county that paid him. And the iron, under its rust, was good iron, forged heavy and forged right. It was a grim, dead, ugly little building. And Cord, standing in the doorway with the desert light behind her, looked at those rusted cells the way a smith looks at a heap of good scrap, seeing not the ruin but the iron, and what a patient hand might make of it. Whose was it? She asked. Cassius thought about it. County's, by rights. But the man who kept it, who was jailer here for 30 years, and blacksmith besides, forged those very cells with his own hands, was a man named Elias Marsh, kept the jail and shod the town's horses both, out of the little forge in the yard behind. Fair jailer, they say, fed his prisoners off his own table, let no man freeze, saw more than one drunk sobered and sent home instead of charged. In the winter the county seat moved to the rail and the jail closed for good. No wife, no kin, anybody ever knew. The boards held it for the taxes ever since. He looked at her sideways. $1 clears it. Nobody's wanted it in 24 years. Folks'll tell you a place that held that many desperate men kept a piece of them behind the bars. $1, said Cord. $1, said Cassius. And more work than one girl was ever meant to shoulder alone. She laid the dollar on the county clerk's desk the next morning, worn near smooth, shaken from the Bull Durham tin. And the clerk looked from the coin to the lean girl in the too big coat and asked, not unkindly, was she certain? Land didn't change hands for $1. $1 was a hot meal and a bed, which meant one of two things and no third, an error in the ledger, or a place so far past worthless that a quarter-century of men had passed it by for free. It was what she had, Cord told him, and it was what she wanted, and she signed the deed in the plain, square hand her father had taught her at the shop slate, and the clerk drew a great iron key from a drawer and set it before her, black with age, cold as a bar of stock left out in a desert night. It had lain in that drawer 24 years, he said. It was hers now. She closed her hand around it, and the cold weight of it in her palm read to her like the one right answer to a question she'd been asking her whole life. Still with us? Then do the one small thing that keeps a channel like ours going. Subscribe before you carry on. It's little enough to ask, and it means the world. She walked up to the jail that same afternoon with the iron key warming in her fist, and her breath ghosting in the high, thin cold, and she let herself in once she'd struck the seized lock loose. Inside, the ruin lay heavy over sound work beneath. Rust streaked the cell fronts, and pack-rat middens filled the corners, and the flat roof showed daylight at its crack. But when she set both hands on the nearest cell door and hauled, the great strap-iron grate did not give a hair. Hung true on pintles, a smith had set to swing 100 years. She walked the corridor end to end before she'd say a word, sighting the walls for plumb, sounding the stone with her knuckles, testing the iron with a file to see how deep the rust had bitten. It had not bitten deep. Whoever forged this iron had forged it heavy and tempered it right, and under the orange bloom the metal was sound. Whoever raised these walls had raised them to stand. The lock on the little rear door to the forge yard had rusted stiff across the empty years, and for a bad moment the great key would not turn, and she stood there with the cold thought that she'd crossed 2 days of desert to buy a door that had forgotten how to open. She did not force it. A forced lock only jams the worse, old Weber always said, but coaxed it, a drop of oil down the keyway, a slow, patient working of the key just shy of its bind, the way you ask a rusted ward to answer, and at the last the lock gave, with a low iron groan, and the bolt slid back. She swung the great front door wide, and 24 years of shut air broke loose at once, and the smell of the place rolled out to meet her, dust and rust and rat and old iron, and under it, worked into the very stone across 30 years, the ghost of coal smoke and quenching water and unwashed men. the smell of a place where the desperate had been held. She stood on the threshold with the low sun, laying her shadow the length of the stone corridor, and then she stepped inside. The corridor ran back past the two barred cells to the small forge room at the rear, the anvil still standing on its stump, a scatter of a dead smith's tools rusting on the bench where his hand had left them. It was a grim, dead place. It stood. It was hers. And turning slow in the barred light, Cord felt a whole life she'd never let herself want come down and settle over her, quiet and exact, the way a well-cut key sits in a lock and every ward lifts clean. She slept that first night in the forge room on her bedroll, a small, careful fire drawn up in the old forge, and the desert outside was loud, with sounds no depot girl had slept beside. The wind moaning through the high-barred windows, the yip of coyotes and the answer, off the next rise, the small settlings and tickings of an old stone building, learning it was not, after all, empty. Sleep came slow, but somewhere deep in the night the fear thinned out, and a steadiness came into its place. The calm of a lock finally understood, the sense of a life coming at last into the shop it was forged for. She began at the cells, because the rusted iron had been calling to her since she crossed the sill, and a smith's daughter cannot leave good iron rusting in a room and think of aught else. She meant only to see whether the cell bunks and grates could be freed and worked bright again. The bunks were strap iron shelves, forged solid to the wall of each cell so a man could not pry one loose for a weapon. That much was plain. But when she took a file to the underside of the second cell's bunk to test the rust, the file's rasp came back hollow, not the dead ring of solid iron, a drummed, empty note. She rapped it with her knuckle, end to end, and where the bunk met the stone wall it answered hollow. She brought the lantern, and she saw that the end of that iron bunk was not solid at all. It was a forged box, a hollow shelf closed with a fitted iron plate, riveted shut and painted to match, invisible to any eye but a smith's who thought to sound it. A strong box forged into the very furniture of a cell, in the one place in that building a man could stare at for a year of nights and never once suspect. She sat back on her heels for a long moment in the lantern light. Then she went down the street and brought Cassius up, because there are some doors a body oughtn't open alone. He got down and looked a long while at the riveted iron plate in the end of the cell bunk, and rubbed the back of his neck. "Elias Marsh," he said quietly, "a jailer and smith in a silver camp, banked half the county besides, held men's pokes, safe the nights the faro table was hot, kept the payroll iron when it came up from the mine, and a jail's the one strong box in a town no thief will walk into willingly." People always wondered what became of Marsh's own money, for he died with empty pockets. Nobody asked him to live. He wasn't a man to ask. He looked at the hollow bunk. "Reckon we've found it, forged into a cell, where a man could sit on his whole fortune and never know he wasn't alone with it." She worked the rivets cold, drilling and cutting them one by one the way old Weber had shown her to take apart a thing meant never to be opened, patient, no haste, and at the last the iron plate came free, and behind it opened the hollow of the forged bunk, dry and close, its inside greased against rust 30 years gone. And ranged within it, laid end to end down the length of the shelf, was a row of small iron caskets, each no bigger than a brick, each forged shut and hinged, and each, she saw as she brought the flame near, stamped on the lid with a year, struck deep with the smith's own numbering punches. 1856. Behind it the years marched back into the iron dark. 1857, 1858, one small casket for every year. The old jailer had kept the peace and the forge both. A portion of each year sealed into the bunk of an empty cell. While the town outside forgot, the jail was there. She drew the first casket out and worked its hinge free, and the lid lifted, coin. Gold on top, laid in oiled leather gone stiff as horn. Eagles and half-eagles, the milling still sharp under a skin of oil. Silver beneath, both dollars worn thin in the pockets of dead miners, and under the coin, banded flat, the paper money of the camp, mine scrip and greenbacks, folded and pressed. Casket after casket out of the hollow bunk, one for each year, the old man had jailed the guilty and fed the drunk and shod the town's horses, a little of every year forged away in the iron. Some caskets were heavy. The one stamped 1873, a rich year for the Vane, would scarcely close. Some held nearly nothing. 1866, a hard lean year, held 2 coins and a folded card of a man's name, a prisoner's maybe, that the old jailer had kept for some reason of his own. Better than 30 of them, ranked in the iron like a row of ingots. Better than 30 years of a fair man quietly sealing something away in a cell that only he would ever open. Cord sat down on the cold stone floor with a gold eagle bright and cold in her palm, and something rose up hard behind her ribs, and she set her jaw and breathed it slow. And even until it passed, the way you steady a shaking hand before you strike the hot iron true, and there's no second blow. Cassius said not a word. It was no moment for words. Between them they counted the better part of 2 days, and when a straight-dealing coin man had come up from the county seat and weighed the gold on his own balance, and named her honest figures, the whole of it, gold and silver and scrip together, came to something over $10,000. More money than Cordelia Vane had let herself so much as picture holding in the whole span of a life. And even so, it was not the money that broke her open. In the last casket, the low one at the far end of the bunk, beneath the final fold of leather, lay a flat packet, and inside it a small bundle of old ledger leaves tied with wire, and one sheet folded twice upon itself, its wax seal cracked with the years, marked across the face in a plain iron sewer hand, for the one who thinks to open a cell. Cord broke the last of the wax with fingers that would not quite hold steady, and read it there on the stone by the swinging lantern. "My name is Elias Marsh," it began. "I was born in Kentucky in the year 1824, and came to this country as a young man with a good hand at the forge and not a dollar to bless myself. I took the jail in 1855, and I kept it 30 years, and I forged these cells myself. And in all that time I never once let a man freeze in my iron nor go hungry in my keeping, guilty or no, which is a thing I hold above every coin in that bunk. Whatever the world made of a jailer who died with empty pockets. Whoever you are, reading this by whatever light, the money in the cell is no treasure. It never was. It is only what I could not bring myself to spend, laid by a little at a time, and it did me not 1 hour of good sealed in the iron while I grew old and alone above it. I always told myself I kept it against some hard day. In 30 years the hard days came, and I never once broke the iron. There is my whole error struck plain, and I have had a long quiet time in this emptied town to read it back to myself. Here is the thing I have to tell you, and I could never say it to a living face. 30 years I locked men in and turned the key, and kept them safe behind my good iron. And somewhere in those 30 years I locked myself in with them. I built my whole life out of iron that shuts things in, good locks, strong bars, safe cells, and I forgot that iron that keeps the world out, keeps you in just the same. I let no one freeze in my jail, and I let no one at all into my life. I died the safest and loneliest man in the county. Do not do as I did. Do not build yourself so strong a lock that you are the one shut inside it. You came into my jail for a reason, whoever you are. Perhaps you needed a place to stand at last. Perhaps you were building toward a thing you could not yet name. Perhaps you were only lost, as I was lost, and stayed lost far longer than a soul should. I was every one of those, once. I hope this serves you as I never let it serve me. The coin is not the point of it. It was never more than the key that fits the lock. What counts is the door, and that you turn the key the other way, and open it, and let the world in. The building is honest and well-founded, and she will stand another 100 years if you keep her roof whole and her iron oiled. Some buildings are so. Some lives could be, if only we would let them. Elias Marsh, struck by his own hand. In the spring of 1877, Cord read it through twice. Then she folded it small and held it in her lap in the cold hush of the jail the old smith had forged and kept and died alone within. And her mind went walking to a forge by the Benson Depot and a father in the ring of his own hammer, to a girl of 6 laying a broken padlock's wards out on the anvil to learn how a shut thing opens, to old Weber turning a key in the lamplight, saying every lock is a question with one right answer, and the door swings both ways. What shuts a thing in shuts the world out. And it went to Elias Marsh, gone 24 years into the desert ground, the fair jailer who had kept a whole county safe behind his good iron and locked himself away along with them, and learned the last plain thing too late for it to save him, and struck it into metal for whoever came with the hand to open a cell. And she understood, sitting there, the thing she would carry to the end of her days, that the coin in the bunk was the least of what the old man had left her. He had left her iron to work, and a warning worth more than the gold, that a lock strong enough to keep all harm out will keep you in alone. The money was never the gift. The gift was the door, and the key turned the other way, and the leave to open it and let the world come in. By the following spring, the jail was a different building, and Cordelia Vane was a different woman. She did the work with care. The way old Weber had taught her a thing worth doing is done once, and done true. A little of the money went to the labor. The rest she banked at the county seat and drew on sparingly. She had the cracked flat roof torn off and relaid sound, so the wet could never work down onto the iron again. She freed and worked the rusted cells bright, days of file and wire brush and oil drawing the rust from the strap iron until the metal shone gray and clean, rehanging the grates true on their pintles, retempering a hinge in the old forge she'd relit. She scrubbed the stone, glazed the high windows, cleaned the dead smith's tools, and hung them where a working smith's tools ought to hang. And on a bright cold morning she lit the forge full and drew a bar of iron to red heat and struck it true on the old anvil, and the ring of the hammer filled that dead stone place like a heartbeat, came back into a body that had lain too long still. She did not keep it a jail. There were no prisoners to hold, and a town that size had no need of cells. She made it a smithy and a locksmith's shop, the only iron and lock man for 60 miles of high desert, and she took the 2 grim cells and turned them, in time, to something the old jailer would never have dreamed. She struck the bars off one and made it a bright little room with a bed in it, a room she kept always ready, its door that would lock from within but never from without, for any soul who came up her street cold and with nowhere to sleep. A cell made into the one thing a cell can never be. A room a person is free to leave. She kept the hollow bunk where Marsh had forged it, though now it held only her spare stock and the old jailer's letter. She kept one empty iron casket, too, the one stamped 1855, the year he took the jail, and set it on the forge room shelf, with the letter inside, beside her father's lightest hammer. She hadn't made the place over into something false. She'd turned its own iron to a kinder use. And that is a different thing from tearing it down, as different as a key that locks and the same key turned to open. Redemption Gap took her in the slow way high desert towns do. A curiosity at first, then a nod, then the plain unspoken day when she was simply one of theirs, which is the dearest thing such people give, and the last they surrender. Cassius's wife, a spare quick woman named Teresia, took to carrying up a covered dish of paprikas and dumplings of a Sunday and would hear nothing of pay. "You eat, Kislani," she'd say. "You are too thin for these cold nights." An old mule skinner named Purdy, who'd hauled ore in the good years and known Elias Marsh to nod to, took to the bench by her forge of an evening and gave her the jailer in pieces. The schoolteacher over at the county seat he'd meant to court for 20 years, and never once ridden over to see. The old three-legged forge dog named Cinder that had slept by the fire and lay buried now under the mesquite in the jail yard. Cord wrote some of it down in a small book she kept in the casket on the shelf, drawing the shape of a man she never met from the leavings that outlasted him. And she opened her doors, not to lock men up, but to the whole iron-starved county. For the country roundabout had gone 24 years, with no smith and no locksmith at all, and its gates hung on broken hinges, and its wagons wanted tires, and its doors had lost their keys, and there was a hunger for good iron she had not looked for. They came from the far ranches and the buried little towns with plow points to sharpen and tires to set and locks whose keys were long lost. And this last was the work she loved best, for she could cut a key to any lock a body brought her, read the wards blind through the keyhole with a smoked blank the way old Weber taught her, and give a woman back the key to her dead mother's trunk, or a family the key to a strongbox no one had opened in a generation. And she never once overcharged a hard-up hand, nor shaded the work, fair as old Marsh had ever been fair to the men in his keeping. Some of what folk brought her was rusted past all saving. She told them so gently and did what could be done, because a smith who won't try a ruined lock has mistaken her trade. And she did the one thing the old jailer never had. On the evening she finished the place, when the roof was sound and the forge rang sweet, and the free little room stood ready with its door unlocked, Cord left the great front door of the old jail standing open to the night, not shut and barred, as Elias Marsh had kept it 30 years, but open, the desert air and the lamplight passing freely through. And she sat in her own lit doorway and let the world come to her instead of forging one more wall against it. The open door that the old man, in all his years of good iron, had never once let himself leave unlocked. On an evening, late, in a gold spring, she sat on the step she'd rebuilt with her own hands and watched the light run amber across the high grass. The old forge dog's grandpup drowsing warm in the dust at her feet, and she turned the whole of it over. Her father in the ring of his hammer, who had shown her the shape of her life before she could read it. Old Weber turning a key in the lamplight, who had taught her that every lock is a question with one right answer, and the door swings both ways. And Elias Marsh, 24 years now, in the desert ground, who had kept a whole county safe behind his iron and locked himself away alone with it, and learned the last plain thing too late for it to save him and struck it into metal for whoever came. There is a pull in a few of us that runs deeper and quieter than any reason we could give for it, older than the words we'd use to name it. We cannot always say why we love the work we love, nor where the loving means to carry us. But it is real, that pull, and followed far enough it tends in the end to set a person down somewhere. For some, the somewhere is a place they were born into. For others, it is a place they must cross a desert to find. A shrieking door, a sounded-out cell bunk, a forged strongbox hidden in the iron of a jail that a whole town swore for 24 years held nothing but rust. What the place is does not matter at all. What matters is whether you can stand inside it, turn the key the other way, and open the door you were always meant to open. Something that says, ward by lifting ward, without a sound, here, this is the place. This is where I begin. Cordelia Vane was 19 years old and turned out with nowhere to go. One worn dollar in a tobacco tin to her name, and she spent it on a dead jailhouse a whole town swore was worthless. Best dollar she ever laid down, and not when the whole account was finally reckoned, for the coin sealed in the cell. For the door that key unlocked, and the iron she brought back bright, and the open door she left, at the last, in a lonely old jailer's memory, so that no one who came to her would ever be shut out. If this one moved you tonight, subscribe to the channel and send it on to someone who's walled themselves in a little too well. And tell us down in the comments, what's the door in your own life you've kept locked too long? And who are you keeping out by keeping it shut? We read every last one, and we'd love to hear it. See you in the next one.